Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start by congratulating the Pakistani delegation, congratulate you on the successfully completing your presidency, and wish every success to the colleagues of Panama. It is highly regrettable that the work of the Security Council, including on the first day of your presidency, is becoming, through the efforts made by Ukraine and its Western backers, into a Groundhog Day of sorts. It's as if yesterday the representative of Kyiv was not sitting in the same chair and didn't try to put forward the talking points of Ukrainian propaganda about the bloodthirsty Russia in its plans to subjugate the neighboring country, and as if the European sponsors of the regime was not reading through their talking points about how Moscow is not ready for peace. Their senseless mantras about how Moscow is not ready for peace. Colleagues, why couldn't we discuss the topic of the meeting yesterday? Especially since the tragedy in Kyiv, which is being mentioned in the letter sent by the Ukrainian PR, happened in the early hours of the 31st of July. The Ukrainian representative yesterday essentially voiced her version of what happened, as predictable as it was. Does the Council accept such an inept waste of its time and resources on other issues on its agenda? Imagine that we had had a situation on the country situation and then decided that we had forgotten to discuss one aspect and then reconvened on the next day to discuss that. We think that such an approach of the Western sponsors of the Kyiv regime is irresponsible, unacceptable, and seriously undermining the credibility of the Council and its ability to tackle with indeed urgent crises. And they have the temerity of accusing my country of wasting the working time of Security Council members. Furthermore, when they condone the attempts of the Kyiv regime to separate the discussions of the Ukrainian crisis into right discussions and wrong discussions, the Western delegations do show the very same wish to undermine the efforts for peace in Ukraine, which we describe in our statements, including my statements yesterday. Mr. President, if we go back to the formal reason for the convening of the meeting today, well, in the early hours of the 31st of July, the armed forces of Russia, pursuing the goal of demilitarizing Ukraine, did indeed deliver a group strike using a long-range, high-precision weapons and UAVs on military-industrial facilities of Ukraine, including a military airfield, ammunition depots, stocks of missiles, and UAV components. All of the intended military targets were hit. And let me underscore once again, we're talking about objects which are related to the Ukraine military potential. And this was confirmed by the videos by Ukrainian users in social networks, which show very clearly the secondary explosion of ammunitions at the objects we hit, some of which were deployed in civilian sector in violation of the IHL. On the other hand, our armed forces, as was the case before, were acting in strict compliance with international humanitarian law and were not targeting civilian objects. When it comes to striking the residential building in Kyiv and the deaths of civilians, well, the military experts who analyzed the videos which exist concurred on the only reason for the tragedy, as was the case previously as well. The reason is the criminal deployment of the Ukrainian air defense in dense urban areas and the unskilled way of guiding them. During this special military operation, we have received numerous confirmation of the fact that Ukrainian air defense missiles are the main danger for the civilians of this country, and the Ukrainians know that very much, and they openly comment on this. If the armed forces of Ukraine did comply with the IHL, then we would have been able to avoid such tragedies. And the civilian population of Ukraine is not suffering from direct Russian strikes. But the expired princeling in Kyiv is not interested in easing the plight and suffering of his civilians, but rather in presenting such situations provoked by him into present them as intentional Russian strikes. His only goal here is to save his own hide and convince his sponsors to continue financial and military support to his agonizing dictatorial and corrupt regime. The abuse of the Security Council meetings so as to shift the responsibility for the death of his own citizens is a favorite trick of Ukrainian state propaganda. It is not a coincidence, and many have noted that the most high-impact tragedies miraculously coincide with the eve or the time of the visit of the Kyiv clique abroad, when he needs to get the pity from yet another country or cage another tranche of military or financial assistance. What's left outside here is the fact that the Ukrainians themselves launch several hundreds of UAVs against our country daily, intentionally trying to strike civilian objects in their futile attempts to sow panic and undermine the stability of my country. Last week alone, as a result of that, 155 civilians were injured, two-thirds of them because of drone strikes. The highest number of victims were in Belgorod, Kherson, Zaporozhye Oblast, and the Krasnodar region. The Ukrainians are deliberately targeting the places where civilians congregate, residential buildings, public transport, and emergency services. For example, as a result of a UAV strike against an ambulance in the Pologo region in Zaporozhye Oblast, the driver of the ambulance died, and the paramedic and the nurse there were injured. In Golopristan district of Kherson Oblast, 3 civilians died and 5 were injured because of a drone attack on a civilian bus. All of these facts are carefully ignored by Kyiv and his backers, as we have been able to see very well today. And what is being done by secretariat staff from relevant agencies is also disingenuous, because they pretend they don't know nothing about this, or they say that it's impossible to verify the information about Ukrainian crimes. All of this is obviously a strike undermining credibility of the UN. Mr. President, in conclusion, let me underscore yet once again that we are not against discussing the Ukrainian crisis in the Council. We're against making the tragedy of the Ukrainians who became hostages of the Zelensky regime and his maniacal will to sacrifice them on the altar of geopolitical interests, that it be exploited in the Council for political reasons. It's disrespectful and indifferent to the suffering of thousands of people who are dying and suffering in other areas of the world, and Western members of Security Council are in no hurry to ask for meetings on that. I'd like to believe that reasonable Security Council and international community members with good sense will support us in this.
Thank you, President, and congratulations to Panama on assuming the Security Council presidency. I also wish to express appreciation to Pakistan for their successful tenure as President of the Council. And thank you, Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Yencha, for your briefing. And I welcome the representative of Ukraine at this meeting. The Russia-Ukraine war should never have started, and would not have under President Trump's leadership. It has been the largest and deadliest war in Europe since World War II, and continues to wreak unconscionable death and destruction. Generations of Russians and Ukrainians have been tragically lost. On July 31st, Russia launched 309 attack drones and 8 missiles against Ukraine. This latest round of attacks has so far killed 11 civilians, including a 6-year-old boy in Kyiv, and have injured at least another 130 people throughout Ukraine's populated areas. They set fire to and destroyed residential buildings and the children's ward of a medical facility. The United States condemns these attacks. For more than 3.5 years, the United States and many other countries have implored an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, as did this Council in adopting its resolution 2774 in February. Last month, Russia launched more than 6,400 drones, an 18% increase from its previous record of 5,438 drones in 1 month, which was set in June. These attacks must stop. In light of Russia's intensified aerial assaults on Ukraine and the increasing toll on civilian life, on July 29th, President Trump clearly stated a peace deal must be done within 10 days. Otherwise, the United States is prepared to implement additional measures to secure peace. President Trump is offering both Russia and Ukraine a way out of this conflict. Once again, we implore them to take it. Vanquishing the scourge of war is the best thing for both the Russian and the Ukrainian people. We call on all UN member states to join us in this effort. I thank you.
Today, Ukrainian national flags in the cities and villages of our country are at half-mast to mark the day of mourning for the victims of another terrorist act by the Russian Federation, commitment of which Russia just recognized in this chamber. On the night of 31st July, Russia launched a massive attack on Ukraine with 309 attack drones and 8 cruise missiles. Our air defenses intercepted most, but not all. Smoke broke through. Some broke through. Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, was the main target, with attacks also hitting Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Sumy, and Mykolaiv regions. As of now, at least 31 civilians, including 5 children, fell victims to the attack on Kyiv. 159 civilians, including 16 children, were wounded across the capital. One of the Russian missiles struck a multi-story residential complex in the capital. A section of the building collapsed entirely, reduced to debris and silence, along with the lives of people who called it home. Families were buried under rubble. Additionally, one private house was destroyed, and over 40 civilian infrastructure facilities were damaged. This attack was preceded by another terrorist act carried out 2 days before, when Russia bombed a prison facility in the Zaporizhia region. Not by mistake. They dropped bombs from the sky knowing civilians were inside. 16 people were killed, 43 more were left wounded. These are not accidents or collateral damage. These are deliberate acts of terror by a Moscow regime that hears the world's calls for peace and responds with bloodshed. Once again, the world witnessed Russia's response to our desire for peace, shared with the United States and Europe, with new killings and more destroyed homes. It is a deliberate campaign to terrorize civilians and destroy any notion of normal life in Ukraine. This effort is propped up by Iran and DPRK in blatant defiance of numerous Security Council resolutions. These regimes supply Moscow with drones, missiles, and ammunition, while Chinese companies continue to provide dual-use goods and equipment, contributions that further fuel Russia's ability to wage war and deepen the suffering inflicted on our people. Russian regime will not stop if it's not forced to. If we fail to confront it, it will continue its aggression and illegal occupation and will commit more and more war crimes and crimes against humanity. Torture, inhuman treatment of civilians and prisoners of war, widespread sexual violence, the deportation of civilians and children, destruction of cultural heritage, acts of ecocide, environmental devastation. In the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, Russia is committing systematic atrocities, turning the lives of millions of our people into a living nightmare. Putin's decree of March 20 mandates the forced expulsion of Ukrainian citizens from occupied Ukrainian territories, or forces them to undergo procedures aimed at forced integration and passportization by September 10 this year. Concurrently, it is conducting forced mobilization in the occupied Ukrainian territories, and these actions are part of a genocidal policy aimed at extermination of Ukrainian people. By all indicators, the Russian Federation is an undisputed aggressor. Military full-scale invasion, direct use of military force, occupation of territories, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, disinformation and propaganda, economic blackmail, interference in internal political processes, threats of using weapons of mass destruction, support for international terrorism, and border provocations. This list is not just a tally of crimes, it's a diagnosis of a regime that poses a threat to the entire civilized world. And this is why Ukraine requested this council meeting today. Kremlin wages this war because it sustains its regime, the war that he cannot win but refused to end. Real peace will come only through diplomacy, but backed by strength. Even Russian dictator Putin has cynically and unequivocally admitted the truth behind Russia's war against Ukraine. For the Kremlin, war is not a tragedy, it's a thrill. In December 2024, Putin remarked that when everything is calm, measured, and stable, Russians get bored. It feels like stagnation. They want, I quote, some action, or so-called движуха. This chilling confession reveals that all the justifications we've heard from Russia since 2014 are pure lies. What Putin and his criminal regime truly seek are imperial conquest, consolidation of power, and violence. Russian delegation sits in this chamber and speaks of diplomacy, while their missiles and combat drones strike people's homes, hospitals, and kindergartens. They talk about negotiations while expanding the front line and conscripting more men to die in a war of their own choosing and making. Russia awaits the international law to be defeated. They believe that the world will look away and that justice will be avoided. Don't push the horses. This will not happen. Russian illusions will shatter against the unbreakable resilience of Ukrainian people. Russian illusions will shatter against the unyielding will of the international community, because we stand united in defense of justice and freedom. Mr. President, Ukraine will continue to fight for its people, for its sovereignty, and for its future. Our goal remains a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace rooted in the principles of the United Nations Charter. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is ready to meet Putin, since all actual decisions in Russia can be made only by him. During the last meeting with the Russian delegation in Istanbul on 23 July, we proposed to organize such a meeting before the end of August. But no progress has been made. We understand who makes the decisions in Russia and who must put an end to this war. The world understands what has been made. We understand who makes the decisions in Russia and who must put an end to this war. The world understands this as well. Ukraine calls for moving beyond public statements and technical level discussions to direct talks between leaders. The United States has proposed this. Ukraine has supported it. What is needed now is Russia's readiness. As there was no positive development on other critical elements of the discussions, full and unconditional ceasefire for at least 30 days is needed to restore confidence and enable meaningful negotiations. Although this latest round of Istanbul talks yielded certain results in the humanitarian sphere, particularly concerning the exchange of prisoners, the Russian side, as before, shows no serious intention for a genuine peace. Kremlin's aim is to create an illusion of the diplomatic process, to delay sanctions and buy time in order to occupy more territory. By doing this, while also shelling and bombing Ukrainian civilians, Putin sends a signal of disrespect to all who are committed to end the killings. That is why we reiterate our call on the members of this Council to adopt resolution demanding a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. The world counts on the strength of your voice and urgent decisiveness of your action in bringing this war to an end. As we said yesterday, peace will not come through appeasement. It will come through unity, resolve, and justice. The cost of inaction is too high. Delay only emboldens the aggressor. Therefore, in addition to the above, Ukraine calls for immediate and full synchronization and expansion of all sanctions targeting Russia's war machine, unconditional and total embargo on the exports of dual-use goods and technologies to Russia that are used in production of missiles and drones, decisive coordinated action to completely block all financial flows from the sale of Russian energy resources, which are the main source of funding for this war. Strict measures against Russia's shadow fleet and companies involved in the illegal export of Ukrainian grain. Immediate release of all Ukrainian civilian hostages and prisoners of war, as well as the return of forcibly deported Ukrainian children. Let's be clear, Russia's war of annihilation demands not only a condemnation, but also a collective stand coordinated, sustained, and rooted in the principles that define the United Nations. And the time has come for all to act accordingly without delay. Thank you.